Welcome, my sisters and brothers. I am Robert, humble messenger. It is my pleasure to share with you conscious channeling of LL research. Welcome to the Law of One. Your question this evening has many levels and is most thoughtful, and we are happy to begin to address those levels at this time through this instrument. You ask, basically, how to be of service to any person that you may meet, which may or may not be a spiritual seeker of truth, such as are you, and how to determine this. We would suggest that it is not necessary to determine whether the person with whom you interact is consciously a spiritual seeker, for all entities in some fashion are spiritual seekers, whether they are conscious of that quality within themselves as yet or not. You're sharing spiritual concepts which come naturally to you and sharing them without proselytizing them. For you're not there to change any mind, but there to give possibilities, to share which is most meaningful to you. And to do that, it is helpful, as was stated in the question, to attempt to become the person that you are attempting to serve. That is something which takes a conscious effort on your part and may be accomplished more fruitfully, we believe, through an intuitive feeling that you get from the interaction with any person that you are in conversation with and discussing spiritual principles. So we would recommend that as you interact with people that you meet in your daily round of activities, as you share with them answers to questions they may ask you, that bring forth from you the spiritual concepts that you are most familiar with. But you have exercised frequently within your own path of seeking, that you do so without hesitation. Speak as though these thoughts come not from your mind, but from your hearts. They are imbued with the love of the one infinite Creator. And that as you speak them, you share them as that which is the nature of your spiritual path, of your reality, of your being, as though you were sharing that food for growth with someone who asked you, "What is your diet?" It is most helpful to listen to the questions that such a person might ask you, and to utilize your own intuition and respond spontaneously. As we said, through the open heart, so that your answers are a part of a conversation, a communication where you are coming together in thoughts and words and joining with another, so that you are, in effect, becoming one being in that moment. A conversation and communication. This is the sharing from heart to heart without attempting to convert or convince any other person, but to freely share. This is our recommendation for this portion of our response. At this time, we shall transfer this content to the one known as Austin. We are those of QO. We are those of Quo, and we are now with this instrument. As we settle into our connection with this instrument, we find that while he has relatively low energy to offer this contact, there is still a stable focus offered, and we assure him that we are able to work with what he brings to the service. For it is our role in this service to attempt to meet the instrument within their own capacities in order to serve together. And it is this similar dynamic of attempting to meet an other self that is relative to the query posed for this evening. It is indeed very intricate and mindful work that is implied by this query. The attempt to relate to another self in an authentic and meaningful way that imbues your sharing of yourself with the spiritual seeking and those lessons gained upon that path is, in many ways, the work of the Blu-ray Energy Center. And it is work done subsequent to the initial opening of the heart and the decision of the seeker to choose one path or another of service to others or service to self. But before we continue examining how one may open oneself and relate to other selves who one perceives to be upon a different path or a different level of their own path, we would continue to examination of the discussion that unfolded before this contact began, attempting to clarify how one defines that spiritual seeking and how one views others in this context. It is important to understand oneself and one's relationship to one's own path in order to then relate to another individual self upon their own path. And we find that attempting to discern these concepts with your language can be both cumbersome and illuminating. To seed this contemplation, we would pose the question for any individual who considers themselves a spiritual seeker. What is it that is being sought? We find within this instrument's mind a common response among this particular community of seekers. May be that it is the seeker of truth upon this journey. Yet we ask you to consider that the context for this is indeed greater, for this label of seeking of truth may also be true for those you would consider scientists, exploring the material realm of the universe without consideration for the spiritual, or even perhaps for a simple detective attempting to unravel a crime that has unfolded. These things may be defined as truth, and yet for the spiritual seeker, the truth that is being sought is something deeper and underlying of those more specific truths. And we may define this as the metaphysical realm that informs your physical realm. We find that those who resonate with our words are those who have, for one reason or another, found a deep fascination with attempting to understand the unseen aspects of your world that your philosophers have attempted to define for many centuries. There is a fascination with understanding what creates what you experience as the material world, and what informs the behavior and the perception of aware beings. This is quite a specific take on the idea of seeking the truth. we would encourage one to consider how necessary the fascination with the metaphysical world is to one who is seeking with an open heart. Any individual who has discovered a spark of love and compassion and empathy, and who makes any attempt to share and to cultivate this and to allow it to shine through them into the world, we feel may be defined as, in a sense, a spiritual seeker. And yet there is no necessity of metaphysical questions involved, at least not in the conscious sense. And so, as you attempt to determine what it means to be a spiritual seeker and to interact with those who, for whatever reason, you do not consider to be a spiritual seeker, consider what is the important aspect of your seeking in that interaction. Is it the specific details of the metaphysical? Or is it the shared vibration of love that is being sought by many upon your world that pays no mind to the specific details similar to those that we share with you? With this in mind, we do feel it is also helpful to consider what we have called the sinkhole of indifference, and how you, as such seekers, may relate to those who have not yet made such a choice, and who seem to be asleep in their daily round of activities, without giving much consideration for either the metaphysical details of your experience or the importance of choosing what we have called one polarity or another. In essence, those individuals who have not yet fully opened the heart or chosen to close it consciously and instead drift between one decision or another of serving others or serving the self. You may already perceive that such individuals can be mostly described as being caught in certain patterns. And these patterns are reinforced by the ever-increasing demands of your society, and even such tools designed to encourage this, wavering and wavering, seeking comfort, and giving little consideration of how one relates to their other selves. Now, how one may interact with these individuals and share oneself authentically and without hesitation is indeed a grand question for the seeker of truth. At this time, we will take our leave of this instrument and continue this discussion through the one known as Kathy. We are those of QO. We are those of Quo, and we are now with this instrument. We would begin this segment of our response to your most important query with the thought of simple sharing from one entity to another, of thought, of deed, of love. Sharing of any of the substance of the self that has worthiness, that has capacity to support and help others, that has the ability to ignite a spark as it is shared from self to other self, that spark of seeking a pathway of growth. However, that may be defined by each individual. Consider an entity well aware of its place upon the path of spiritual growth. One who is radiant from the heart and all parts of its being. One that unhesitatingly shares of itself in small ways or in larger ways, that gives off a radiant light. As the sharing is done, this light is noticed, perhaps in little ways, or perhaps thoroughly by those others around, watching, observing, or receiving the gift of whatever it is. That is that spark of sharing of light. It could be as simple an act as giving one of your dollars to another to buy something of need or something of enjoyment. It could be giving a simple smile to someone who is alone and perhaps standing in the rain, waiting for a chance to cross a street to a place of cover. Just one simple gesture of sharing of love and the light that goes with that sparks a warmth in the heart of the other self who receives that dollar or receives that smile. Or in that moment, there is a knowing that such things are the most important of the moment. They are the important substance of existence on earth at this time. These gestures of support, those gestures of love, those gestures of reaching out to another, if the other self receiving such is already well along a spiritual pathway of growth and well aware of the light that guides that, as it follows that, it may feel that radiance of shining and that connection and share equally back to that entity who gave. There is a community, a harmony, and a peace between two in that instant, such as your growth in your world towards that fourth density of love and understanding, existing moment by moment, instant by instant between seekers upon the path, sharing between and amongst themselves, easily radiating forth and back, love and giving without hesitation, authentically. And then there may be others who are beginning their path, beginning their growth, a simple smile, a simple sharing of love. That radiance may have an even larger impact on that entity who may not have ever been smiled upon. And just that way, with such openness and radiance, and it may awaken in that person a wondering and awareness. Such love that could be given so openly, and it may cause them to begin a more sincere and committed journey upon a path of growth, one which they may not be completely aware of. But the love shared, being so fully given and freely given, is something such that is food for their heart, food for their soul, so to speak. So that the entity begins pondering and understanding even in a small way. This spiritual seeking involves those things of sharing and of love and of connection from one entity to another, from one self to an other self, and may begin having felt that love to begin themselves to share outward. To notice how positive that feels, to notice how more advanced upon a path they may not even realize they are on. More advanced they may feel having taken a step forward in love. For spiritual seeking involves deeply one's own heart, one's own spirit, one's own mind. But it also involves the connection with other selves, hearts and minds and spirit as well. For we seek together, all of us, at whatever level we are advanced to become. We are a community, and we would say that those of you on your earth plane are a community as well. We would say the more that is shared of love and of giving of hope and of peace between each other, the brighter that light upon the communal path becomes. The more all the entities understand that they're all on a path of spiritual seeking and growth. Growth of one indeed affects the growth of all others. There is much that can be spoken about this topic. And for more on this topic, we now pass this contact to the one known as Gary. We thank you. We are those of Quo. We are those known to you as that principle of QO, and we arrive once again with our hearts open in gratitude to our companions in this circle, who links arms with us to undergo this dance of service. Once again, we appreciate the fastidiousness of the challenging from each in the group. It is a challenge which we are glad to meet. For, like two musical keys in a similar frequency, it lights up an aspect of our own essence that we may find compatibility with this group. Within the illusion which you now enjoy, each begins in a state of what could be described as a sleeping. For a veil has been placed between the conscious mind of the seeker and their deeper resources within those layers of mind that begin in the individual's subconscious and move downward, broadening out to include various strata of group mind, until one arrives at the cosmic mind itself, within all that wonder, an expansive viewpoint, and understanding, and history, and the knowing of the self, and all things as creator, as sacred, as divine, is hidden from the self. It is out of view. It is unknown. So much so that the self can spend not just years and decades, but lifetimes becoming consciously unaware of the roots of their own being, consciously unaware of what it is they truly wish to do with your experience in the illusion. Consciously unaware that they and everything they meet is none other than the one creator in various guises. Unaware, we may say, of their own hearts. And in lieu of that deeper knowing, they expand their energies, seeking objects of fulfillment within the illusion, which may include comfort and distraction and other aspects which enhance the illusionary sense of individuality that arises when one is cut off from this knowing. There is no judgment about this particular state of being. Indeed, nearly all within third density will pass through this chapter in their journey, for it is designed that the mind-body-spirit complex undergoing third density will forget its true nature. Typically, through the mechanisms of suffering and the discomfort of disorientation, the impulse will arise within the third density entity to begin harnessing its will for the purpose of asking questions, for the purpose of piercing beyond the conceptual boxes of thought which were inherited as the seeker grew and was conditioned by your third density illusion. There is no one correct way to seek, no one correct method that certifies the self as the seeker. It is rather, as we have been describing previously, an orientation and attitude that sets one off upon a journey, even though they may be little aware of its destination for some time. Nevertheless, there is an embarking. There is a movement within the being, and a process is begun to peel back the layers of costume which the self had adorned over top of its being, shall we say, to find out what is underneath the self that is an orange ray being. What is underneath the self that is a red ray being? What is underneath the self that is a yellow ray being? What is underneath the many limited concepts of who the self is? Concepts arising out of not only misapprehension of the true nature of the self, but also out of injury. And one of the seeds, understandings, and motivators of a separate self, that's being fear. The self has begun a process of undressing, shall we say, and seeking true authenticity, sensing that the containers which they inhabited, useful though they were for a time, are temporal and, in a sense, fictional, representing not the true nature of self. but thought forms that were adopted and identified with for a time. To connect this to where we had left off with the previous instrument, this work which the seeker of the spiritual nature of reality does in healing those illusionary layers of self, so that the Creator's light may shine through the self which has learned to love and forgive, is in and of itself a service to all. The instrument as the image of a collective mind into which each upon your planet are plugged, while within the third density as something of an ocean. Each entity constituting, we enhance this. The mind in particular of each entity constituting the atoms and molecules and manifested portions of that ocean water. Much of that ocean of this collective mind is murky due to the confusions, impurities, and mixtures of negative energies which inflict harm and suffering from one to the other. As the seeker discovers its own heart of being, that portion which is you within the collective experience becomes clean. We may indicate for metaphor. You clean and clarify your portion of the collective experience. And not necessarily in a boundaried way, such that you are one circle or sphere or clarified crystalline water surrounded by that which is murky, but instead all water that you come into contact with also has the opportunity of some potential of transmutation as it enters your view. Each who you encounter is given a mirror, not a mirror which reflects judgment or condescension to the self for your superior feats and achievements. Understanding the other self's inadequacies and silly limitations, but rather is given a mirror of compassion that lovingly sees the other self in their suffering and the confusion that arises in that suffering and perhaps unskillful decisions that result from that suffering, and holds that personality shell in a field of wholeness and completeness, seeing beyond the outer role that the other selves play upon the illusionary stage of their destiny, and to recognize and hold not only the soul within, but the eternal spark of the Creator within. This vision is possible for the spiritual seeker, not because they have amassed philosophical knowledge about the spiritual nature of reality, though such study and resources is vitally important, but it's because they have clarified their own understanding of self. They have, through the hard disciplined work over time, learned to honestly face the pain within, the shadow within, that which has been rejected about the self, along with that fear of undesirable outcomes, of threatening circumstances, of death itself. The spiritual seeker has not conquered these things or manipulated or controlled these aspects of self, but has, with grace, learned to relax these tensions and open the heart in fearlessness and in the knowing of the largeness of self, the deepness of self, the beauty of the self, and the perfection of self. And in the knowing that the imperfect self, of which each in this circle is aware, and all seekers become aware, can not only be lived with and tolerated, but genuinely accepted. Not accepted after the self changes, but accepted now. And now again, as each new aspect of the self comes into view. And better yet, as each facet of self loses its cloaking, its camouflage, as each facet of self loses its cloaking, its camouflage, to reveal what was really there underneath that vulnerable, tender self that has needed protection from a hard world, as is expected by your peoples. Seeker has done and is doing and will forever be doing this work, and does so not solely for the benefit of the self's own spiritual evolution, but for all of its group, and indeed for all of the infinite creation. The entire infinite being is contained within a given mind-body-spirit complex. To awaken from the dream of a separate self is for the Creator itself to awaken to itself as that personality becomes transparent. And for everyone else within the dream, dreaming their lives away, perfect as that is as well. The seeker, which has realized the self as the creator, becomes a message from what seems to be the beyond. Though paradoxical, the beyond is home to all. Whether any other self chooses to make use of that message that you bring, that particular tone, that wavelength of love light, is to their own sovereign prerogative. It is not, from the positive perspective, to be imposed, enforced, or controlled upon another self. It is an opportunity which the spiritual seeker offers. Remember, ultimately, it is the function of the other self doing the work they have to do upon their own being. Let me say, it is the fruit of that work which can be manifested that you do as an outward service, but is first and foremost an effortless, energetic radiation from the self. It is truly that light that emanates from the being who has become transparent through love, forgiveness, and acceptance. That light shines through the eyes of all to us, and most especially to that universe which is the Creator, which is the All, which is infinity, which is both who you are right now, doing the seeking, and is what you seek, which will one day end as you conceive it, and the realization that it has been nothing other than the Creator playing the game which you take to be a you as a separate entity. At this time, with gratitude for each instrument in this circle and the magic of this experience, we transfer our contact to the one known as Jim, with a special note of gratitude for revisiting that very first contact that he enjoyed as an instrument for the Confederation of Planets that he shared with the circle prior to this channeling. We are those known as QO. We are grateful for the ability to utilize each instrument as a means by which to elucidate the various levels of response to the query that was presented to us this evening. It was a most thoughtful query, one which each secret truth must be able to deal with the daily round of activities. For at all times you are interacting with those entities which may or may not be what you call conscious spiritual seekers. And in some way you will be able to share what is your spiritual truth in a way which hopefully presents an opportunity for each entity to respond in kind to you. Is a great journey, is a great work. All conscious seekers of truth and all those who are not yet conscious seekers. For indeed all shall be that. And we appreciate each channel's openness to a different quality and level of response to this query. We will now take our leave of this instrument and this group. And thank you once again for the joy joining hearts, minds, souls, spirits in the great quest of returning into unity with the one infinite creator that resides in all entities at all times. We are known to you as QO.